The story begins on July 4th, 1978. A boy named David excitedly watches the dogs competing in a frisbee championship. He dreams of competing one day, so he tries to train his dog, Bruiser, to catch a frisbee. However, Bruiser is very lazy and doesn't pay attention to him. After the event, Jeff, David's younger brother, makes fun of him and says that Bruiser will never win anything. David gets upset and insists that one day his dog will be a champion. The brothers are about to argue, but their parents, Bill and Helen, make them stop. At that moment, a strange craft flies over the area, and everyone freezes in surprise as they watch it. On the way home, Jeff keeps teasing David in the car until their father tells him to leave his brother alone. Later, Bill drops Jeff off at a friend's house and reminds him to be careful with the fireworks. Before parting, the brothers insult each other again. When they arrive home, their parents scold David and remind him that, as the older brother, he needs to be more responsible. While waiting outside with Bruiser, a girl named Jennifer rides by on her bicycle and greets him. David watches her because he is in love with her. Later, from his bedroom, David uses a small telescope to observe Jennifer in a boat with her friends. His father comes in and realizes that David likes the girl. He advises him to try talking to her, although David says he doesn't know how. That night, while feeding Bruiser, his mother asks him to go look for Jeff, who is already on his way back home. Even though David thinks his brother can return on his own, he agrees and heads into the woods with his dog. As he walks, he thinks about how to change so that girls will like him. Suddenly, Bruiser starts barking in a strange way. David hears odd noises and, all of a sudden, Jeff jumps out to scare him and then runs off. David sees Bruiser at the edge of a ditch and, when he approaches, he falls in. He isn't hurt and climbs out quickly, but he notices that Bruiser is gone. David returns home alone. When he gets there, the door is closed, and he thinks Jeff is playing a prank on him. He knocks and asks to be let in, but instead of his family, an unknown woman opens the door and asks who he is. David says he lives there, but the woman tells him he is mistaken. Before she can close the door, David stops her and asks for his mom, but she says she doesn't know who he is talking about. Confused and scared, David goes inside the house and desperately begins looking for his parents. The woman tries to stop him, but he doesn't listen. In one of the rooms, he finds the woman's husband, who also has no idea what is happening. The man asks David his name and where he lives, but David, completely confused, breaks down in tears and asks for his mom and dad. Seeing his condition, the man decides to call the police. At the police station, an officer checks his information and discovers something impossible. There is a report saying that David disappeared 8 years ago. Detective Banks thinks it must be a mistake, but the computer confirms that it isn't. David was even declared legally dead. Hearing this, David asks in fear who is dead, but the officers only tell him they are trying to understand what happened. As they take him in the car, they ask his age, and David answers that he is 12 years old. Then they ask the date, and he confidently says it is July 4th, 1978. The officers are left in shock. A short time later, they stop in front of a house. David doesn't know who lives there until the door opens and his father, Bill, appears. David runs toward him, but stops when he notices that his father now looks much older. His mother, Helen, also comes out and cannot believe what she is seeing. Completely confused by seeing his parents aged, David faints. Meanwhile, somewhere else, the director of NASA, Dr. Faraday, arrives at an area where a strange extraterrestrial craft has been found. No one knows what is inside it or how it works. A guard named Brayton explains that the craft struck a power tower and then stopped in midair as if nothing had happened. Faraday is amazed to see how light the ship is and decides to take it to the research center. David wakes up in a hospital, terrified. His parents are by his side and assure him that they won't let anyone hurt him. David asks what happened to them and why other people are living in his house. Bill tells him that the only thing that matters is that he is alive. When Bill asks where he has been all this time, David replies in confusion that he only went out to look for Jeff. At that moment, Jeff enters the room, but now he is 16 years old. David cannot believe it and refuses to accept that this is his brother. Jeff comes closer, says it is strange that David has not changed, and apologizes for scaring him in the woods. Little by little, David begins to realize that something impossible has happened to him. To help him understand, Jeff shows him one of the posters his parents put up all over the city when he disappeared. The poster says that David has been missing for 8 years. Although David is shocked, he still cannot fully grasp it. Jeff tries to calm him down and reminds him how they used to tease each other when they were kids. David admits that he is scared, and Jeff promises that they will find answers. When their parents return to the room, David asks his father to take him home. However, Bill explains that the doctor wants him to stay in the hospital for a few days to run some tests and figure out where he has been all this time. Helen also assures him that they will not let anyone hurt him. Then she decides to stay with David that night, while Bill and Jeff go back home. Later, David asks his mother if he really was gone for 8 years. Helen confirms it, and David, frightened, says that everything feels like a terrible nightmare. The next day, the strange craft is taken to a NASA research center, where scientists begin to study it. That same night, while Jeff is studying in the room, David suddenly wakes up saying that he hears a voice calling him over and over again. He cannot explain what it says, only that he feels someone needs him. David is afraid he is losing his mind, but Jeff tells him he believes him and not to worry. Reassured, David goes back to sleep. At NASA, the scientists inform Dr. Faraday that it is impossible to open the craft. Even so, Faraday is convinced that there is something important inside and orders them to keep trying. Back at the hospital, the doctors examine David's brain and make an incredible discovery. His mind is sending out strange signals and seems to be communicating directly with a computer. Suddenly, the image of the extraterrestrial craft appears on the screen. Seeing this, Faraday goes to the hospital and tries to convince David to go with him to the laboratory to discover what really happened to him. At first, David and his father refuse, but Faraday promises that it will only be for 48 hours and that afterward he can return home. David, who needs answers, agrees to go with him. As they are about to arrive at the research center, David hears the voice again and asks who it is. Faraday does not understand what he means, and David decides not to say anything. The mystery is only beginning. David arrives at the NASA Research Center and is taken to a room where he will have to stay for 2 days. He asks when he will be able to talk to his parents, and Dr. Faraday promises that he will be able to call them the next day. Before leaving, he tells him to relax and watch some television, but as he leaves, he locks the door, leaving David surprised and scared. While watching TV, David notices that the programs are very strange and that he does not recognize anything. Suddenly, a robot enters the room and approaches him. David is frightened, but right away a young woman named Carolyn appears and explains that the robot is called Rolf and that it is only used to deliver things inside the facility. Although it sometimes makes mistakes. Carolyn asks why he is under such heavy security, and David jokes that it is a national secret. Before leaving, David asks why his favorite TV show is no longer on, and Carolyn tells him it was cancelled many years ago. When she hears that David disappeared 8 years ago, Carolyn realizes he was telling the truth and begins to see him in a different light. The next day, David manages to speak on the phone with his parents, who tell him they are already preparing for him to come back home. Shortly afterward, he is taken to a laboratory for some tests. When they ask for his name, a computer answers for him, using his mind. David is shocked. When they ask where he was during those 8 years, the computer responds that David was on a planet called Phelan. The scientists cannot believe it. Faraday asks more questions and discovers that David traveled at the speed of light, so for him, only a few hours passed, while on Earth 8 years went by. David does not understand anything and becomes even more frightened when the computer begins searching for the planet Phelan on star maps. Not knowing what is happening, he runs out of the lab. Faraday is left frustrated and realizes that today's will not be enough to study what is going on inside David's mind. Later, Carolyn brings him food again. Still shaken, David tells her that he just wants to go home and that at least tomorrow he should be able to return to his family. But the truth is that things will not be that simple. Carolyn reveals that David's name is already on the meal list for the entire next week, which means they are not planning to let him go. When he understands this, David becomes furious, smashes the mirror in his room, and screams that he wants to go home. Desperate, he begs Carolyn to help him contact his family and tell them the truth. She agrees to help him, and David thanks her with relief. The next morning, David hears a voice calling for help. Without knowing where it is coming from, he answers that he will go. At that moment, Rolf the robot appears and David hides inside it. In this way, he manages to get past the guards unseen and reaches the hangar where the extraterrestrial craft is stored. Suddenly, the ship lowers a ramp and David goes inside. The interior is strange and seems to be alive. A seat appears behind him and an artificial voice orders him to sit down. Calling him the Navigator, the voice explains that his brain contains all the information needed to complete the ship's mission, including star maps that were implanted in his mind without him knowing it. Meanwhile, a guard notices that the craft has activated and alerts everyone. The voice warns David that extraterrestrial life forms are approaching, actually referring to Faraday and the scientists. When the guards aim their weapons, David refuses to come out and decides to flee inside the ship. The craft lifts off from the hangar and hovers outside. The voice tells him they must return to the planet Phelan, but David refuses and demands to go home. Realizing that the ship only obeys his commands, David experiments with it and discovers that it can travel impossible distances in seconds. When the ship stops, David asks to go outside because he needs to use the bathroom. While he is out, he asks the voice what it is doing on Earth. The ship reveals the truth. It was sent from Phelan to collect samples of life from different planets. And it chose David because humans use only a small part of their brains. That is why they filled his mind with star maps. The voice explains that when the ship crashed, it lost all its data, and now it needs the maps stored in David's head to complete its mission. David asks why it took 8 years to bring him back home. The voice explains that it normally returns its specimens at the exact moment it takes them, but that David's human body was too fragile to travel through time without danger. Although disappointed, David accepts the explanation, and when he sees helicopters approaching, he asks the ship to take him home. The ship agrees, but only if David gives it the star maps in his mind. David accepts and returns inside so they can escape. The helicopters lose their trail, and Faraday is left frustrated. During the flight, David decides to call the control system Max and asks him to take them to a safe place. Max takes them to the bottom of the ocean, where David is frightened at first, but the ship assures him there are no leaks. There, the transfer of the star maps from David's brain to the ship begins. While he waits, David discovers that the ship is carrying other alien creatures that were studied on Phelan. Among them, he meets a small, harmless being named Puckmarin, with whom he plays and for whom he feels affection. Max explains that Puckmarin is an orphan and that he plans to take him back home once the mission is completed. When the transfer ends, Max recovers the star maps, but he also absorbs part of David's personality, becoming more human, joking, and playful. He even almost causes an accident when he tries to let David pilot the ship. On Earth, Bill calls Faraday to ask if his son is alright. Although the director pretends to be calm, he later orders that Carolyn be located when he learns she was the last person to see David. Carolyn manages to reach David's parents' house and tells them the whole truth. But NASA agents arrive, order them to stay inside, and take Carolyn back to the base. Meanwhile, David tries to return home with Max's help, but he first appears in Tokyo and then returns to the United States. Unable to find the right place, he ends up in another city, where he asks for coins to use a payphone. From there, he calls his parents. Jeff secretly answers, while Helen distracts the NASA agents. David asks for directions to get home, but since he does not recognize any nearby place, Jeff suggests giving him a visible signal from the air. David agrees, hangs up quickly, and prepares to return, now closer than ever to reuniting with his family. David heads toward the city where his parents live while Jeff gets some fireworks to give him a signal from the rooftop. When he sets them off, the lights fill the sky and David sees them just as he reaches the city. At the same time, Faraday manages to track the ship and realizes that David is coming back home. When the ship lands in front of the house, Faraday orders David to come out. His parents also beg him to return, but David understands that he no longer belongs to that time. After telling them how much he loves them, he goes back into the ship and explains that his true home is in 1978. If he stays in 1986, he knows he will spend the rest of his life being studied. Although Max warns that traveling to the past is extremely dangerous, he agrees to try. Before leaving, David asks if they will ever see each other again. Max answers that he does not know, and the journey begins. The time jump is violent and chaotic, but the ship succeeds. David appears once again in 1978, in the forest where everything began. He runs home and finds his parents and Jeff in a boat near the house. Happy to be back, David joins them and tells them how much he loves them. His parents are surprised, but they smile, seeing their children finally together. Before the day ends, a small alien creature peeks out from David's bag. Jeff sees it, but promises to keep the secret. David smiles, relieved and happy. As he looks up at the sky, David hears Max's voice, saying goodbye and telling him that someday they will meet again. Don't forget to like and subscribe and let me know what you think about this movie.